His Excellency, the Prime Minister of India, whom I invite to address the General Assembly.
Harmony and peace. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. हमारी आवाज में आतंक के खिलाफ दुनिया को सतर्क करने की गंभीरता भी है और आक्रोश भी. मानवता की खातिर आतंक के खिलाफ पूरे विश्व का एकमत होना, एकजुट होना मैं अनिवार्य समझता हूं.
On the issue of terrorism, as we expected, the Prime Minister made a mention of it but didn't refer directly to Pakistan. He said there was a need to strengthen the world's fight against terrorism, that there needed to be more anger about what it was doing to humanity, that for the sake of humanity, it was important for the world to unite against terror. So that was the key takeaway there. But the Prime Minister spending much of his speech talking about what India has done as far as its development goals are concerned in the last few years, what it is aiming to do over the next few years as well, from the fight against tuberculosis to global warming to the Swachh Bharat campaign, the no single-use plastic campaign which is underway, digital identification programs, etc. He ended by talking about the need to strengthen multilateralism and to strengthen the United Nations, giving a message, as he said, of harmony and peace as far as India and India's values are concerned. He began also by saying that, you know, India is the world's largest democracy. The world's biggest election had taken place in India. We have Jyoti Malhotra also joining us, the editor for National and Strategic Affairs with The Print. Lalita Kumaramangalam, who's a member of the BJP, is with us as well. Let me first get your take on this, Jyoti. You heard the speech. What did you think?
Well, the Prime Minister seems very, very self-assured, Nidhi, and he's had a great week in America, right from Houston to New York, you know, meeting Trump, meeting a variety of world leaders, as well as the Iranian leader, Hassan Rouhani. So I think at the UNG, it's more like a concluding take of his visit. And as you said, I think he keeps so he doesn't want to put one step wrong, which means that there's no negativity. So there's no accusation that, you know, against Pakistan or anybody else. And basically he's invoking the world to say that it's not just my problem or India's problem that there is this cross-border terrorism from Pakistan, but it's the world's problem, and that everyone should come together and combat this terror. But what I thought was really interesting was his invocation of, you know, he makes two references. One is to this 3,000-year-old poet, this Tamil poet. I forget the name. I'm sorry I didn't catch the name. But I'm just wondering, you know, 3,000 years ago, obviously there was a Tamil poet called, you know, this name. And, you know, where did that come from? We know that Rakhi Gadi, the Harappa, sort of late Harappa settlement that we've just had, I'm not sure that's even 3,000 years old. So that's the first.
Well done with your history.
And that's the first point. And the other one was, and he said, ki humne vishwa ko buddh diya. So this message of peace. And now, you know, when Buddha was, when Gautam Buddha was, you know, this sort of message of Gautam Buddha when he was alive and well, that was also, I'm not sure, maybe, you know, a couple of, how many, maybe at least over 1,000 years old. But at that time, India was, you know, a different country. So the short point I'm making is that there was no Pakistan or Bangladesh or India. So to say that Gautam Buddha is just an Indian, I mean, I'm not sure. You know, Nepal also claims him.
Well, Ajay, you actually, before we went into the speech, had a very different take on how the Prime Minister's visit to the United States has gone. You don't feel that it was as much a success as the government of India wants to project. Now, why is that?
I think that it came in the context of this whole Kashmir clampdown and so on. The afterwash of that was very much in evidence in terms of both the media reporting, a lot of the protests that were outside some of the places where the Prime Minister was meeting or speaking. And I think that in effect, what we are seeing as a phenomenon is that this Kashmir issue has managed to achieve what Pakistan wanted to do with the Kargil war, which is to internationalize the Kashmir dispute. You've seen at least 3 occasions in the last 1 week where President Trump and his officials have actively offered to mediate the Kashmir dispute. This was impossible. This was something that was just not said by these countries in previous years. Now it seems to have become the language of speaking about India and Pakistan and Kashmir. So I think it's become an issue which is very much on the plates of every politician like Trump who wants to insert himself forward. And in that, I think the government has failed and has suffered a setback. So on the one hand, in multilateral diplomacy and in bilateral meetings and so on, Prime Minister Modi has ticked all the right buttons, met all the right people and so on. But in terms of public perception, in terms of media coverage, and in terms of these gratuitous pieces of sort of unsolicited offers to mediate on Kashmir, I think we've come off pretty badly.
Well, interesting you say that. Seema, I just wanted to get your take on that because, you know, the fact is the Prime Minister, as Jyoti also pointed out, didn't make any reference to Pakistan. We didn't expect him certainly to talk about Kashmir. But his speech also comes on a day when the State Department issued a pretty strong statement that talked about both India and Pakistan. Telling India that we hope that you are rapidly going to roll back these restrictions, release detained leaders in Jammu and Kashmir, and also telling Pakistan that, hey, you know, you need to tone down the rhetoric and show some concern for Muslims who are being persecuted by China. It is interesting that, you know, speech came in the backdrop of this. What do you think, you know, would have really gone on behind the scenes? Because it's no accident that Donald Trump keeps talking about mediation and Kashmir, even if he phrases it with the caveat of if both sides want it. There seems to be a very sort of purposeful statement that he keeps, and the White House readout the other day after the Trump-Modi meeting specifically referred to Kashmir.
Absolutely. So Imran Khan has had some success. We cannot deny that. He has brought the issue of Kashmir front and center. And there has been a lot of discussion about it. So the State Department statement is, while it acknowledges that India and Pakistan have to solve it bilaterally, but the very fact that they've been mentioning it so often is significant. They do always bow to Indian position. They acknowledge Indian position that which Modi made very, very clear in his discussions. But there's no denying that Imran Khan for the past 1 week has been beating the same drum about Kashmir, and he's got some attention. As far as media narrative goes, Western reporters, you know, they do focus on this, on the Indian side of Kashmir. They kind of fail to focus on what's happening on the other side. I don't know who's to blame for that, whether Indian messaging is good or not, or adequate or not, is you know, something to be discussed. But there's no question that there's been more talk about Kashmir this year than in the years past.
Lalita Kumaramangalam, the fact is that you're going to see in a short while from now Imran Khan speaking at the UN, and his speech is expected to focus almost entirely on Kashmir. Yes. I guess many would say it's good that the Indian Prime Minister sort of chose not to get drawn into a spat on this at a forum like the UN. I think India wants to be seen as rising above.
Absolutely. And Nidhi, despite all the opinions and my respect to all the other panelists, the fact is that ultimately international geopolitics is largely determined by the economics that backs those politics. One of the biggest successes of Mr. Modi's trip, which nobody has talked about so far today evening, has been his meeting with the oil and the gas, the energy majors in Houston. Houston was chosen very specifically by the Indian government to be the venue for Howdy Modi. And India has, well, initiated, if not inked it already. I don't think they've inked it, but they certainly have initiated and got pretty far forward in achieving two things. One, that we will have a more positive balance of trade. The trade deficit will come down when we start importing, especially gas from the oil companies of the US. And two, that means a huge amount of money that is going to be given, spent by the Indian government, from which the US will obviously will benefit. Now, the US, I suppose, has to be bipartisan, or at least appear to be bipartisan, because they still have to get out of Afghanistan. They also would like to cut Iran out of the picture insofar as Indian energy purchases are concerned. But they also need India to keep China at bay. So when we are looking at what is happening in America, it shouldn't be in isolation, and we shouldn't just think of the UNGA. Prime Minister Modi has been extremely restrained in his speeches. We have never referred to Pakistan at all. Pakistan, on the other hand, comes across, according to me, instead of concentrating on an imploding economy. They are really doing disastrously, which we all know. He's sort of everybody thinks he's brought Kashmir on the international, we are talking about it this week, but let's see what happens in a few days' time. Everybody will forget about it. Now, I think India has more important things to do. We have 1.3 crore people, a little more than that, 130 crore people, in fact, a little more than that. We are the biggest emerging market in the world whom everybody wants access to. And our real power lies in those economics. Yes, at the moment, people will say the economy is a slowdown. Yes, but we are addressing it.
Sure.
We are very actively and almost aggressively coming up with not perhaps solutions, but certainly trying to come up with ideas and policies which will help to kickstart the economy again,
I
or rather
understand the point you're
kickstart
making,
it
but
back
I have
to
a counter
very,
question to that.
Superior position again.
To Ajay Shukla, actually,
So
because
you're
talking about the economic might.
Quite frankly, I don't think we should just judge Mr. Modi on Mr. Imran Khan's so-called success or lack of it.
No, but and certainly not on that. I agree that there shouldn't be a comparison at all. But Ajay, at the same time, while India hopes that its economic trajectory would be something that would keep, have it in a sort of separate standing from Pakistan. The fact is, whenever the Prime Minister does speak now at international forum, and he did it here too, he opened by saying that we are the world's largest democracy. This was the country that had the world's largest election. In his opening comments when he met Donald Trump the other day, he talked about the world's oldest and the world's largest democracies coming together and having a conversation. In that backdrop, the lockdown, therefore, in Jammu and Kashmir, the detention of leaders, is that not something that is a yardstick India needs to judge its own democratic credentials by? It's not what other countries tell you to do, but it's what standards you set for yourself when you tell the world that you are the world's largest democracy.
Nidhi, you're so right. I think Lalita Kumaramangalam is perhaps misspeaking in saying, if I understood her correctly, that economics is all that counts, and in another few weeks everybody will have forgotten about the Kashmiris, and in effect saying that, well, we can do exactly as we please. I would like to remind her that I am of the belief, at least even if it's unfashionable nowadays, that besides economic power, besides military power, besides strategic power, India is what India is because of moral power. And moral power comes not from, just bulldozing your way and having your way, but convincing people, convincing your own people, and so on. So to say that, people will forget about the Kashmiris and then we can do exactly what we want, I think, I'm sure she misspoke. I don't think Lalita Kumaramangalam would have actually meant that.
Don't misquote me, please.
So at least I would like to believe that she didn't mean that. I think that what India does in Kashmir, how it irons out the problem now, how it restores normalcy, will be critical to how India is viewed in the global community in the years ahead. And to that extent, I think it's an extremely important issue.
Before I come to Jyoti on that, Ms. Kumaramangalam, do you want to clarify, because Ajay seems to have inferred something from your comments. I don't think you meant to say that Look, nobody would give a damn
what
about
I
Kashmiris.
said was, yes, Ajay seems to have inferred something which is not what I said at all. No, I never use such words at all. I don't use such words, as everybody knows. Now, I did not say that Kashmir is not important, or that the Indian government eventually has to bring back democratic normalcy in Kashmir. We have said we'll do it. I think that's a different topic for a different day. We are here to talk about Mr. Modi's visit, and of course today the statement he made before the UN. What I said was that economics and of course the military, all the various wars or whatever you want to call them, skirmishes that are going on in various parts of the world have a huge bearing on geopolitics. And while yes, Mr. Imran Khan has been going on and on, ranting on and on about Kashmir, and yes, Kashmir, after the abrogation of 370, there has been a huge pushback from many people against the Indian government. Let's not forget that Mr. Modi is not, here for life, in the sense that he has been elected. This time we got 303 seats in the Indian parliament. So it's not as if this is some sort of totalitarian country, which is why he opens by making it very clear this is a democracy. The very fact that every day there are, enormous number of discussions on how the Indian government has erred in Kashmir, the mistakes in Kashmir, the torture, the house arrests, etc., etc., itself is proof of the fact that this is a thriving democracy.
The entire opposition in Kashmir
now, what has been done is Kashmir has been done for several reasons, and like I said, that's not the main topic today.
Forget Imran Khan. My question is, do we not hold ourselves up to the high democratic standards that we have set for ourselves?
It's very easy to say that, Nidhi. No.
It's not easy to say that at all, actually.
Nidhi,
actually, Jyoti has a point on that. Jyoti has a point. It's not easy to say that.
When such sort
because we have our own reputation to uphold. That's my question.
Actions are taken, which eventually will have to be dismantled. Yes, of course we do, and it's not that we are not upholding it. To say that what has happened in Kashmir, the abrogation of 370, has totally ruined India's reputation in the international scene or fora is quite untrue.
Now, yes, I think it's very clear India's got support on the action itself.
Amount of support
I think, Ms. Kumaramangalam, what is very clear is India's got support on an action that has been taken
even
internally
within the country,
in the state.
Now, I'm not
but the question is not about Imran Khan. I asked a very different question.
The stand of the BJP has been very clear that Kashmir is an integral part of India and will always be a part of India.
I think we have no doubt about the fact.
There's no question that there is. That is true.
There's no doubt about the fact that Kashmir is an integral part of India. But I think the question that Nidhi asked, and I would completely agree with you, I think we have to answer our own conscience about what's happening in Jammu and Kashmir. The fact that 50 days on, the entire political leadership is either under house arrest or just under plain arrest, not just in jails inside Jammu and Kashmir, but across the country. We've been talking about connectivity. In fact, the Prime Minister used that word in his speech at the UNGA. Now, I think, Nidhi, what's also happening is that you also know that the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, is in Kashmir even as we speak.
I think he's back.
Well, I'm not sure if he's back because he was supposed to be there for a few days. There is a concern inside the government. What is the government of India, what is the Modi government going to do about Kashmir? There are no ideas right now. What is happening is that this briefing that you referred to by the senior State Department official Alice Wells, where she talks about an answer to a question, she says that Prime Minister Modi has laid out a plan of action to the American government, to President Donald Trump, where he talks about the political leadership. Now, she doesn't say whether they're going to be released from this arrest, but they talk about a second generation political leadership, but she maintains...
She talks about release of detained
and
leaders engagement with
the people of Kashmir, the release of the political leadership, and then she says, let's see what happens. So clearly, I think as of now, the Kashmir story, the Trump government is going to take a little bit of a backseat, because I think Lalita Kumar Mangalam is right about the economics. There was a $2.5 billion deal that was signed in Houston between India's Petronet and this American company called Tellurian. There is obviously going to be much more, and I think that's the bait that the Indian government is giving them.
But as you said,
the question of Kashmir is front and center, and when the Prime Minister comes home over the weekend, that will have to be dealt with. America is receded to the background. He's got himself a bit of a breather. What does he do on Kashmir? What does the government of India do with its own people, on Kashmir? I think that's the point.
Prime Minister did not mention the word Kashmir in his speech, and I think he was wise not to. But I think it was extremely telling that his opening words were to the effect that I have the support of all of India in what I am doing. I have just won an election. This is probably the first time that a Prime Minister has gone, of India has gone and talked about his winning an election.
No, he does have the support of the people. There's no question about it.
But the fact that he had to mention that to the United Nations General Assembly indicates that he's saying it's not just me, it's the whole of India that's behind me.
But I think that the country is also behind the abrogation of 370. Let's not make it, yes, absolutely. But I think the country is not comfortable about the fact that the entire population, 8 million people, have been locked up or locked down or whatever it is. The entire political leadership is behind bars. People are not, even those who are in favor of abrogation of 370, are not comfortable about the fact that nearly 2 months after that decision, there are no ideas. What do you do with your own people? What is the democracy that we talk about when we don't have any idea what to do with this problem?
We have Leela Punappa also joining us at this hour, former Deputy NSA. She's with us. Michael Kugelman of the Wilson Center is on Skype with us as well from New York, as is Seema. Michael, just to get your take on what you thought of Mr. Modi's speech, you had actually written before the speech that you felt it was an opportunity for him to have addressed some of that criticism on how India is handling its own people in Kashmir. I told you on Twitter that's not going to happen. You know, many would say, however, that given that we are now expecting Imran Khan to sort of go all guns blazing, that it was good for the Indian Prime Minister to not get into a verbal duel at a forum like the UN. That's not his style, not his way of doing it.
Well, you're right, and very few people, including myself, really expected that Modi would want to bring up Kashmir and talk about it. My point had been, why not at least try to acknowledge that there is tremendous levels of global criticism and opposition to all of these things that have happened in Kashmir since the revocation of Article 370. And it could also have been a preemptive way to push back just a little bit about push back against Imran Khan, who we know is indeed, as you said, going to come out guns blazing, trying to demonize Modi and India in the darkest manner possible. But look, I think another thing that I had written in that op-ed that you cited is that what Modi could try to do here, what he should have tried to do, was push back against the criticism from the world by trying to play up India's ability to be a able, willing, and responsible global partner. And how to do that, but by doing the things that he actually ended up saying today, and that is to highlight India's efforts to combat some of the biggest global challenges, such as terrorism, climate change, hastening access to clean sanitation. He talked about all these things, just like the late Sushma Swaraj did last year when she gave India's speech. So in that regard, I think the speech was successful in the sense that it did try to project India in the way that the Indian government would want it to be projected. But indeed, I think it is a shame that not one word for Kashmir at all, given the fact that certainly you have not had governments around the world trying to bring attention to it. Much of the world has said no, this is an internal or a bilateral matter. But there has been significant levels of opposition, not just from the international press, but from senior political leaders in many key capitals.
Well, Pawan Verma is with us. He's, of course, with the JDU, but also has worn a diplomat's hat and an author's hat. Mr. Verma, what do you think, though, Modi in his second avatar, with this bigger mandate, what do you think has changed in his foreign policy approach, particularly vis-a-vis Pakistan?
I think in the UNGA speech, which I want to say to you quite on the aside, is a fairly routine affair in the United Nations. It's not always the highest level diplomats who are even there in the audience. People take notes and send it on to their headquarters. It's a routine exercise where hundreds of heads of state or government address the UNGA and make a written statement or read out a written statement or make a speech. But that apart, I think his speech was important for not granting equivalence between India and Pakistan for subverting the hyphenation between India and Pakistan, which Pakistan would have liked. In other words, if Pakistan as a smaller and a weaker country is obsessed with India, and Prime Minister Imran Khan will talk mostly about India and Kashmir, the Prime Minister took a wider canvas as befitting a major power in the world, and spoke about larger issues, including about certain key developmental programs in India which have an interface with global issues such as climate change, health and sanitation, including touching upon terrorism. I think that was one good takeaway from his speech today, which is important.
Right. Well, Leela Punappa, you know, how did you see the dynamics with President Trump, though? And, you know, on 2 consecutive days when President Trump was asked about Pakistan's role in sponsoring terrorism, he said, well, you know, the bigger problem is Iran. Now, do you think that's something that should concern India, or do you think that's something India would have factored in anyway?
I think India would have factored it in. I think the American establishment, including the White House, is quite knowledgeable about the role that Pakistan has played in developing the entire terrorist structure worldwide, including concerning certain events within the United States itself, and of course the shelter that they provided Osama bin Laden. So I don't believe the American establishment would have any illusions about it. What is said publicly is not necessarily the end of the discourse. I think there is a far more serious and in-depth discussion that takes place between the professionals behind the scenes, which is not necessarily put out. The personal chemistry seems to be good, but let's not forget that as far as President Trump is concerned, it's America first. And I think as far as India's Prime Minister is concerned, it should be India first. So there are some areas of convergence, there will be some areas of difference. Even if the United States shares our perception of Pakistan, and I believe they do, they have certain operational interests by which they would not wish to rock the boat while trying to pursue the scope for the combating of terrorism. It's a tricky line. They are on thin ice. They are trying to withdraw from Afghanistan. The talks with the Taliban have failed. It's anybody's guess as to how things will develop because Afghanistan is unsettled. We've seen the violence that has taken place there recently. So let's not read too much just into public statements. The bare minimum is said publicly, the real stuff is in the private discussion.
Coming though to another interesting point, and just last comments from everyone on this, Seema, to you first. The endorsement of Donald Trump by the Indian Prime Minister was another highlight that we saw this week. You know, it's very unusual. It's never happened before, I think, where an Indian Prime Minister has openly endorsed, you know, a particular leader of a particular party. Do you think that is healthy? That is something that is good? I mean, India has also just attacked the Labour Party for what it has said on Kashmir. Is it wise for India to get involved in partisan politics abroad?
The short answer is no. It's not wise. And Prime Minister Modi's endorsement of President Trump in Houston has complicated politics for India because it has the potential of dividing the Indian American community. You know that most of the Indian Americans vote for the Democratic Party, but in the US Congress there's bipartisan support. Now, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is under tremendous pressure from various groups, including many voters, to criticize India on its actions on Kashmir. There are letters from congressmen. One came just yesterday or day before to the State Department saying that they should raise the issue with Prime Minister Modi that political leadership must be released immediately. So in the long run, the short gain of having President Trump at a rally may not play out well for India, is what I would say, because many young Indian Americans kind of left-leaning. You know, it's the older generation that that has the deep devotion or has that same connect to India. The younger generation, you have to woo. You have to actually get them to develop stakes in India if you want, you know, this relationship to keep growing. And this has complicated the politics here tremendously, I would say.
Michael, do you agree with Seema Sirohi's assessment of that endorsement?
I do. I think it was not a very good idea. I think the interesting question is, why would Modi want to do that? Why would he want to go out of his way to seemingly endorse presidential candidate Trump and, you know, take essentially a victory lap around NRG Stadium, almost like the two men were running mates? You know, I think that you know, Modi is savvy, and he knows that Trump responds well to flattery. And there was a lot of flattery coming from Modi to Trump there in Houston. And I think that, you know, it was really an effort, perhaps on the part of Modi, to try to get Trump to understand the significance of the U.S.-India relationship, and that it's worth supporting Modi and the Indian government even more, particularly given how the relationship, while still strong, has sputtered a bit in recent months because of trade tensions, and also as the U.S. has scaled up cooperation with Pakistan over the last year because of the whole Afghanistan story. So I think that's interesting, too, is to look at the motivations for why Modi would want to do what he did.
Jyoti, you had a take on this, that you know exactly why the endorsement happened?
I think the Indians are betting on the fact that that Trump is going to come back to power. And
is it wise to bet on anybody?
Well, I think, listen, I think, you know, if you have a long memory, you will remember that 21 years ago there were nuclear tests, and it was a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, who slapped really tough sanctions on India, which went on for 2 years.
Well,
of course, after that,
the nuclear deal came under a Republican president, right?
Well, absolutely, yeah. But it was a Republican president that pushed the Indo-US nuclear deal.
It's true.
So I think that despite the fact that, you know, Trump is like a different kind of Republican, shall we say, and we know that there was going to be a trade deal. In fact, I was just talking about it with Ajay
the
briefly.
Commerce Minister flew there. We expected it, yeah.
Absolutely. Piyush Goyal was there. Nothing happened. No trade deal, nothing. So I think the Modi government will offer the Trump administration some,
I love how
sorry
you
about
use
that.
the word bait.
I'm sorry about that, but it will offer you know, much more in terms of both trade, and which is why the big CEO meeting that that Prime Minister Modi had. I think that's the short point of why he wanted to this big Houston rally. I think it was very, very interesting. Which foreign leader, tell me, goes to America and does this kind of a rally? I think Trump was pretty much surprised. He was kind of shocked. I mean, to say, hey, listen, this is like, you know, our Elvis. First of all, in India, nobody knows who Elvis Presley is, but never mind about that. You know, we'd rather that it was the Beatles or somebody. But despite that, I think Trump recognized that Prime Minister Modi's star power and his influence over the Indian American, even if they are primarily Republican or conservative or whatever it is.
Yeah, that it's a strong influence.
Strong influence, and that Trump is going to come back.
How do you see,
that's the take.
How do you then see, Ajay, the State Department's comments today, you know, on Kashmir? Like I said, there was a big snub for Imran Khan there as well. Why don't you talk about Muslims in China? But the message for India, and this is not the first time the State Department has spoken. This is, I think, the third time on record, and I'm not including off the record comments, plus Trump's repeated talk of mediation, arbitration, etc. Is there something going on, you think, that is not visible to us
No,
here?
I think that there's something that should be visible to everybody, and that is that American foreign policy doesn't just follow the realist school of thought, where if India is a desirable country, if India is an economic market, if India is a sort of country that is influential in its sphere, therefore it will automatically receive unstinted support. That is not the way the Americans do it. There is a strong component of idealism. One of the reasons why India is seen as a desirable partner to the United States is because India is a democracy, India is a liberal democracy, and therefore when India departs from those lines, it will evoke an official response from the United States. The United States is sort of got a long and illustrious history of supporting totalitarian states for narrow partisan ends, but those are short-term tactical supports. When it comes to larger strategic partnerships, like with the United States, with the United Kingdom, with Australia, with New Zealand, with the Five Eyes and so on. They want a country that is ideologically aligned with it, that is politically aligned and so on.
Doesn't apply
and
to the
therefore,
Saudis, though.
Therefore what?
It doesn't apply to Saudi Arabia.
It doesn't
though.
apply to anybody.
But those are tactical. Those
look
are
at
tactical
China,
reasons.
look at
You're talking about
Russia.
strategic. Yeah.
Those I'm talking
I
about
don't
a
think
strategic
democracy has
partnership.
anything to do
Nobody.
with
It
at
applies
all.
to
This
no
is-
one.
I don't think democracy
In
has
today's
anything to do
brave
with
new
it.
world,
This is what
it's the,
all Indians believe, that there
Look
is
at the
a
building of the Mexican wall.
purely tactical component to United States is this thing, but that is not the case. There is a component of idealism as well.
Neela Punappa, you disagree?
Well, no, I think the idealism certainly is there, and it's something that, let us say, within India, within the United States, the populations, they cherish it. But I don't believe that is the driving force of American foreign policy. I mean, their record of supporting dictators, of supporting authoritarian regimes, of having dialogue with all manner of countries is demonstrated through the decades and centuries, but there's no value judgment to it, because they do it in the belief that it serves their interests. Now, it happens, it's a nice talking point, and certainly there is ground for synergy between India and the United States in terms of democratic values and such like. But I don't believe that this is the driving force. If we were as totalitarian a country as China, I dare say the United States would continue to engage to the extent that they felt that they could work with India. So democracy helps, but it is not the driving force.
Well, as I mentioned earlier as well, it's not about what other countries think of our democratic credentials. It's the credentials that we want to uphold as a democracy, and we are proud to be a democracy. Pawan Verma, you wanted to come in.
I just want to say, let's not take a simplistic view of America. Yes, where state policy is concerned, it's hard-nosed, pragmatic, and America, as Ajay said, has an illustrious record of dealing with totalitarian regimes where it interfaces with its national self-interest. But America as a country, and even America as a polity, consists of many layers. There's Congress, there's the media, there's public opinion, there are different interest groups for whom it matters whether America is supporting a totalitarian state or supporting a non-democratic action in a country which may be otherwise democratic. And that's why I believe, as far as Kashmir is concerned, if there is a delay, if it's later rather than sooner, that normalcy begins to return in Kashmir, if at all, then this issue will become internationalized even without Pakistan's help.
Exactly.
You cannot continue in perpetuity to incarcerate 8 million people and expect that the world will never take any notice or attention, because India is a big market and a large country with as an emerging superpower. It doesn't happen like that. So diplomacy teaches you pragmatism, that you may be taking short-term measures for a limited period of time in an emergency situation to deal with the situation, but you cannot allow that to unfold without any light at the end of the tunnel. And therefore on Kashmir, if you are reading the American media, if you are understanding what the Labour Party is saying, there is an incremental process in which a situation becomes internationalized. One other small point. I believe Prime Minister Modi crossed the red line when he endorsed Mr. Donald Trump for presidency. The first lesson we learn in diplomacy is we flatter, we praise, we cajole, we persuade a head of state.
But we don't deceive.
But we never publicly say in a democracy that we are a partisan party to internal politics.
I think that's very, very sort of outspoken of you as an ally of the government actually as well, not just as a former diplomat. Ms. Kumaramangalam, do you sort of want to take on that criticism of endorsement? What, would caution have been better?
Look, if there's one thing that everybody on this panel knows, it is that Mr. Modi is an extremely smart man and knows how to make opinions swing his way. Now, when he did say "Ab ki baar Trump ka sarkar" or "Ski sarkar," I'm sorry, my Hindi sometimes the grammar is not always the best. He would have done it with a certain aim in mind. There are many people who don't agree with what he did. There are many who agree with what he did. But like I said, when we talk about politics, let's forget about geopolitics, but just the politics between the US and India. There have even in the last 70 years or so, there have been ups, there have been downs. At this moment, America needs India as much as India needs America. Let me put it that way, and that is as bluntly as I can put it. Now, yes, there are several sections of the media and perhaps some other people in America. I am not such an expert on the internal opinion of American citizens, regardless of their age, who may not have liked everything that is being done in India, who may not like Modi's policies or politics, etc. But the reverse is also there equally. And as Ms. Ponnappa said, the fact is that Mr. Modi is India's Prime Minister, just as much as Trump is America's President. So, for the Americans, it's always America first. For Indians, it should be India first. Now, I'm not saying that everybody is happy with the abrogation of 370, and that's what all of this is coming around to. But the abrogation of 370 is really more an internal matter. While the Americans are speaking in different voices on the same issue, even from within the government, Trump says one thing one day, another thing another day. The State Department pats, both India and Pakistan, sometimes on the back, sometimes what one would like to see is a slap on the face. But the fact is that long-term policies are not based merely on sentiment or just a sort of belief in a certain form of politics in a country. It's undoubtedly America is the oldest and India the largest democracy in the world, and as democracies they are doing fine on the whole, but it's a matter of opinion whether and different people have different opinions. In India, no two people I think have the same opinion on any issue. That what is happening in Kashmir is going to color in a great way, or in a great way put the relationship that India has with US at risk.
I don't think that's even
has
the point.
taken certain decisions.
I don't think it's the point of what it would do to the India-US relationship. We come back to the point of what it says about us as a democracy, because it's been almost 55 days of no mobile communication, opposition leaders in detention, people in detention. So I think the point that Pawan Verma was making was that if that doesn't change quickly, then it automatically becomes further internationalized.
It is coming back to normalcy, perhaps not as much as you want to show it coming back to normalcy. That's a different question. But the fact
I don't know what is defined as normalcy
or
anymore.
Anybody else, everybody has got their own little dark secrets that they don't want to talk about. Okay, nor do I, quite frankly, because it seems that different people seem to have different versions of what normalcy is. But that's not,
okay,
that's not
the alternate
what is the
truth.
topic of
But
today's
anyway,
debate. Like
Leela Ponnappa, I think, wanted to come in.
Yes,
ma'am.
But the fact is, no, there can't be no alternate truth.
I think we need to be able to.
Sorry, Ms. Ponnappa, yes.
This whole term that's been coined post-truth, I don't know.
May I come in?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I think we need to be able to differentiate between what we are talking about. On the one hand, we are talking about Kashmir, which is certainly a matter of concern for all of us in India. On the other hand, we are talking about the international perceptions regarding Kashmir, which is a totally different matter. India does not criticize the United States for some of the many aberrant developments within what is a large and thriving democracy, and which are contradictory to their own values. Likewise, I don't believe it is for America to talk about what happens within India, but I think the reality is that countries tend to do it. I mean, you had the Labour Party resolution recently, but then I think British political parties sometimes bite off far more than they can chew on matters that are none of their business, any more than India spoke about British policies in Ireland over the past few decades, if not centuries. So this is not to underplay the situation in Kashmir. Okay, maybe as Ms. Kumabra Mangalam put it, definitions of normalcy might differ, but I do believe that there is a general common sense of how we in India perceive normalcy in terms of an open and free society where discourse can be from one extreme to the other within the tenets of our constitution and our values. That is something that is vital for India as a country. But when we get into what other countries say about us, there I think we need to realize that the real challenge with regard to Kashmir is not what the United States State Department might say from time to time, but really about how we as Indians perceive it. But that's a different debate. I don't believe this is a matter of India's relations with the United States.
Come up in the debate, as Ajay said, is it's about India as a moral power, not just as an economic power or a military power or any other power, but India's moral power, and that is the context in which that has come up. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on NDTV today to analyze the Prime Minister's speech and his visit to the United States.